doors of the Northern Line train slide open and you step onto the platform at Camden Town Station, the familiar rush of London Underground air meeting your face. You climb the worn steps toward street level, each footfall echoing against the tiled walls that have witnessed decades of commuters, tourists, and locals making this same journey. The turnstiles click as you pass through, and suddenly you emerge into the controlled chaos of Camden High Street on a Saturday afternoon. The sound hits you first. Not just the traffic, though the red double-deckers rumble past with their diesel engines growling, but the layered symphony of 1,000 conversations in 12 languages. Street performers compete for attention with acoustic guitars and saxophone melodies that drift between the honking of car horns and the rhythmic clatter of skateboards on pavement. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the brightness after the fluorescent tunnel below. Camden High Street stretches before you like a carnival that never quite packed up and left. The Victorian terraced houses that line both sides have been transformed into something altogether more theatrical. To your right, a massive pair of red Doc Martens boots, easily 3 stories tall, climbs the facade of a shoe shop. The leather looks so real, you can almost smell it from here, though what actually reaches your nose is the mingled aroma of incense, fried onions, and the faint sweetness of cannabis that seems to permeate this corner of North London. You begin walking north, your feet finding their rhythm on the uneven pavement. The crowds part and merge around you, like water around stones in a stream. A group of teenagers with elaborate makeup and platform boots pose for selfies beneath a mural of Amy Winehouse, her beehive hair rendered in bold strokes of black paint against a brick wall. Their laughter mingles with the sound of a busker playing Valerie on his guitar, the irony not lost on anyone who knows Camden's musical history. The shops here seem to compete for who can be the most outrageous. A vintage clothing store has draped its entire front in Union Jack bunting, while mannequins in the window wear leather jackets and torn fishnet stockings. Next door, a piercing parlor advertises its services with a neon sign that buzzes and flickers, casting pink light across the faces of passers-by. The smell of antiseptic drifts out each time the door opens, mixing strangely with the curry spices from the Indian restaurant 2 doors down. You pause to watch a woman with purple hair and arms covered in intricate tattoos arrange vintage band t-shirts on a rack outside her shop. She moves with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this countless times, her fingers automatically straightening sleeves and adjusting hangers. When she catches you watching, she offers a quick smile before disappearing back into the dark interior of her store, where the walls are lined with vinyl records and concert posters from bands that broke up decades ago. The foot traffic grows denser as you approach the railway bridge that carries trains in and out of Euston Station. The Victorian ironwork overhead creates a canopy of shadows, and the rumble of passing trains adds a bass note to the street's constant soundtrack. Here, the shops give way to stalls and temporary structures that seem to have grown organically from the pavement itself. Vendors sell everything from handmade jewelry to vintage leather jackets, their voices calling out prices and descriptions and accents from every corner of the British Isles and beyond. A young man with a mohawk dyed electric blue sits on a milk crate, carefully threading beads onto leather cord. His fingers move with surprising delicacy, and you notice the concentration on his face as he works. Beside him, an woman with hennaed hands arranges crystals and incense burners on a folding table covered with a tie-dyed cloth. The sweet smoke from her samples creates small clouds that drift across the walkway, carrying scents of sandalwood and patchouli. You catch fragments of conversation as you move through the crowd. Two art students debate the merits of different piercing studios while examining their phones. A mother tries to convince her teenage daughter that the leather jacket she wants is too expensive, their negotiation conducted in rapid-fire Spanish. Behind you, a group of tourists from Japan take turns photographing each other in front of the most elaborate shop fronts, their excitement palpable even if you can't understand their words. The architecture tells its own story as you walk. These buildings were once respectable Victorian homes, their bay windows and decorative stonework speaking to a more sedate past. But Camden has always been a place of transformation. The railway that brought industry in the 19th century also brought change, and the area has never stopped evolving. Now those same windows display vintage guitars and Gothic clothing, while the ground floors that once housed parlors and dining rooms have become piercing studios and record shops. You notice how the light changes as clouds move across the London sky. When the sun breaks through, the colors of the street become more vivid. The reds of the brick buildings, the green of the few trees that have managed to find space between the shops, the riot of colors from the clothing and artwork that spills out of every doorway. When the clouds return, everything takes on a softer, more muted tone that somehow makes the scene feel more intimate, as if you're walking through a film set dressed to look like the most bohemian corner of the city. The smell of food begins to compete with the incense and leather. Fish and chips from a traditional chippy mingles with the spices of Thai street food and the yeasty aroma of fresh bread from a bakery tucked between two vintage clothing stores. Your stomach responds to these scents, reminding you that walking and observing is hungry work. But there's still more to see before you stop to eat. A street performer has set up near the entrance to the underground station, his guitar case open and already scattered with coins and notes. He's playing something bluesy and soulful, his voice carrying over the crowd noise with the kind of raw emotion that can only come from years of singing on street corners. A small crowd has gathered, some dropping coins into his case, others just stopping to listen for a moment before the flow of pedestrian traffic carries them away. The energy of Camden High Street is infectious. Even on this gray London afternoon, there's a sense of possibility in the air, as if anything might happen next. A flash of movement catches your eye as a cyclist in neon yellow weaves between the pedestrians, their messenger bag bouncing against their back. They disappear into the crowd as quickly as they appeared, leaving only the memory of their passage and the brief whir of bicycle wheels on tarmac. You follow the flow of people as Camden High Street curves gently to the left, and suddenly the urban canyon of shops and stalls opens up to reveal something altogether different. The Regent's Canal appears before you, like a ribbon of dark water cutting through the heart of North London, and with it comes a change in the very texture of the air. The diesel fumes and incense of the high street give way to something cleaner and cooler, tinged with the mineral smell of canal water and the green scent of algae that clings to the lock walls. Camden Lock itself is a marvel of Victorian engineering that still functions exactly as it was designed over 2 centuries ago. The massive wooden gates, darkened by decades of weather and water, stand open now to allow a narrowboat to pass through. You lean against the metal railing and watch as the lockkeeper, a man in his 60s wearing a high-visibility jacket over a wool sweater, operates the mechanism with movements that speak of years of practice. His hands know exactly how much pressure to apply to the windlass, how long to wait before opening the next set of gates. The narrowboat emerging from the lock is painted in the traditional style, its hull a deep forest green with decorative roses and castles picked out in gold and red. Steam rises from the small chimney mounted near the stern, and you catch the scent of coal smoke mixed with something that might be bacon frying in the tiny galley below. The boat's owner, a woman with gray hair tied back in a practical ponytail, stands at the tiller with the relaxed confidence of someone who has navigated these waters countless times. She nods to the lockkeeper as her boat clears the gates, a small gesture of mutual respect between professionals. You turn your attention to the towpath that runs alongside the canal. The brick and concrete of the market areas give way here to something more organic. London plane trees line the water's edge, their mottled bark creating patterns of cream and gray that shift and change as you move. In summer, these trees would provide a green canopy over the path, but now, in the cooler months, their bare branches create intricate lacework against the sky. Fallen leaves crunch underfoot as you begin to walk along the water, each step releasing the earthy smell of decomposition that speaks to the eternal cycle of seasons. Even here in the heart of the city, the canal attracts a different kind of crowd than the high street. Here, joggers in technical fabrics share the narrow path with dog walkers and families pushing prams. A woman in her 70s moves slowly but steadily, her walking stick tapping against the tarmac in a rhythm that matches her careful steps. She pauses to watch a pair of moorhens picking their way through the reeds at the water's edge, their red beaks bright against the brown and green of the vegetation. The sound environment changes dramatically here. The traffic noise from the streets above becomes muffled and distant, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the canal banks and the occasional splash of a duck landing on the surface. A cyclist approaches from behind, calling out a polite, "Excuse me," as they pass, their wheels whirring softly on the smooth path. In the distance, you can hear the rhythmic thud of a construction site, but even that seems softened by the presence of the water. You pause at one of the wider sections of the towpath, where a bench has been positioned to take advantage of the view across the canal. From here, you can see how the waterway cuts through the urban landscape like a green corridor, connecting Camden to the wider network of canals that once carried coal and goods into the heart of London. The far bank is lined with converted warehouses, their red brick facades now housing expensive apartments with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflect the gray sky. A narrowboat is moored on the opposite side, and you can see into its interior through the open doors. The space is impossibly compact, but perfectly organized, every inch serving multiple purposes. Books line shelves that also hold dishes and decorative objects. A fold-down table serves as both dining area and workspace. Herbs grow in small pots on the roof, and solar panels glint in what little sunlight filters through the clouds. It's a masterclass in efficient living, and you find yourself wondering what it would be like to call such a small space home. The lock mechanism itself draws your attention back to the Victorian engineering that makes this all possible. Water flows through sluices with a sound like distant waterfalls, and you can see how the water level in the lock chamber rises and falls as boats pass through. The lockkeeper explains the process to a group of curious children, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who has given this explanation thousands of times, but still finds joy in sharing his knowledge. "The boats come in here," he says, gesturing to the lower gates, "and we close these behind them. Then we open the sluices up there, and the water flows in until it's level with the upper canal." Simple as that, really, but it took some clever thinking back in the day. One of the children asks how long it takes, and the lockkeeper grins. "About 10 minutes if everything goes smoothly. But sometimes you get boats that are a bit too wide, or the gates stick, or..." He trails off with a shrug that suggests there are countless variables that can complicate what should be a simple process. The market stalls of Camden Lock Market spread out from the canal side in a maze of covered walkways and open courtyards. The architecture here is more industrial than the Victorian terraces of the high street. Converted railway arches and warehouse spaces that have been adapted to house everything, from vintage clothing stalls to artisan food vendors. The sound of your footsteps changes as you move from the outdoor tarmac to the covered areas, where the acoustics create a different kind of atmosphere entirely. A busker has set up near the entrance to one of the market halls, his saxophone sending smooth jazz melodies echoing off the brick arches. The music seems to float on the air, mixing with the sounds of conversation and commerce that drift out from the stalls within. Coins clink into his case with satisfying metallic sounds that add percussion to his improvised performance. You notice how the light plays differently here by the water. The surface of the canal acts as a mirror, reflecting and refracting the gray London sky and sending ripples of light dancing across the underside of the railway bridges. When a narrowboat passes, its wake creates new patterns of light and shadow that shift and change until the water settles again into relative stillness. The temperature feels noticeably cooler here by the water, and you pull your jacket a little tighter as a breeze carries the scent of rain from somewhere upstream. The weather in London can change quickly, and you can feel the possibility of a shower in the air, though for now the clouds are content to simply threaten rather than deliver. You follow the cobbled path away from the canal, your feet finding purchase on stones worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. The sound of your steps changes from the soft tap of shoes on tarmac to the more substantial click of leather on stone, each footfall echoing slightly in the enclosed spaces of the market courtyards. The stables market opens before you like a labyrinth of converted horse stalls and railway arches, each one now housing a different slice of Camden's eclectic commercial ecosystem. The architecture here tells a story of transformation that spans centuries. These buildings once housed the horses that pulled Camden's omnibuses and delivery carts, their haylofts and tack rooms now converted into boutiques selling everything from vintage band merchandise to handcrafted jewelry. The original cobblestones remain, their uneven surface a reminder of the hooves and wheels that once clattered across them when this was a working stable yard, serving the transport needs of Victorian London. Steam rises from a coffee cart positioned at the entrance to one of the main walkways, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans mingles with the cooler air. The vendor, a man in his 40s with intricate tattoos covering both forearms, works with the focused precision of a craftsman. He tamps the espresso with exactly the right pressure, his movements economical and practiced. The hiss of the steam wand creates a brief cloud of white vapor that dissipates quickly in the open air, leaving behind the promise of warmth in a ceramic cup. You accept a flat white from him, the cup warming your hands immediately. The first sip reveals layers of flavor, the bitter edge of the coffee balanced by the sweetness of perfectly steamed milk, with hints of chocolate and caramel that speak to beans roasted with care. The vendor nods approvingly as you taste it, his pride in his craft evident in the small smile that crosses his face. The market stalls around you represent a United Nations of commerce and creativity. To your left, a young woman with elaborate braids arranges vintage leather jackets on a rack, each piece carefully selected for its character and history. Her fingers trace the worn patches and faded labels with the reverence of someone who understands that these garments carry stories. The leather has developed a patina that speaks of years of wear, and you can almost smell the decades of cigarette smoke and sweat that have worked their way into the material. Across the narrow walkway, an older man with a carefully waxed mustache presides over a stall, selling military surplus and vintage camping gear. Khaki canvas bags hang from hooks, their brass fittings dulled by age but still functional. He demonstrates the mechanisms of an old field telephone to a curious customer, his explanation accompanied by the satisfying clicks and whirs of mechanical precision that predates the digital age. The sound environment in the stables is uniquely layered. The conversations of vendors and customers create a constant background hum, punctuated by the occasional laugh or exclamation of discovery. A guitarist somewhere deeper in the maze plays acoustic versions of classic rock songs, his music drifting through the archways and mixing with the sounds of commerce. The clip-clop of heels on cobblestones provides a rhythmic backdrop, while the occasional rumble of a train passing overhead on the railway line adds a bass note that you feel as much as hear. You wander deeper into the network of courtyards and covered walkways, each turn revealing new sights and smells. In one corner, a vendor specializes in incense and aromatherapy oils, the air around her stall thick with the competing fragrances of sandalwood, jasmine, and something that might be frankincense. She sits cross-legged on a cushion behind her display, her eyes closed in meditation, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around her. The contrast between her stillness and the constant motion of the market creates a pocket of unexpected calm. A narrow staircase leads up to a mezzanine level where more stalls occupy what were once the haylofts of the original stables. The wooden floors creak under your feet as you climb, the sound adding to the sense that these buildings have absorbed decades of human activity. From up here, you can look down on the main floor of the market and see how the flow of people creates constantly shifting patterns, like water finding its way through a complex landscape. The view from the upper level also reveals the clever way the market has been integrated into the existing architecture. Railway arches that once provided shelter for horses and carts now frame boutiques selling everything from vintage vinyl records to handmade soaps. The brick arches create natural boundaries between different sections of the market, each one developing its own microclimate of commerce and culture. In one of these arches, you discover a stall specializing in vintage cameras and photography equipment, The vendor, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and paint-stained fingers, explains the mechanics of a 1950s Leica to a young photographer. Her knowledge is encyclopedic, covering not just the technical specifications, but the history of each piece, the photographers who made them famous, the images that changed the world. She handles each camera with the care of someone who understands that these are not just tools, but artifacts of human creativity. The lighting in the stables changes constantly as you move between covered and open areas. Under the railway arches, the atmosphere is more intimate, with artificial lighting creating pools of warm illumination around each stall. In the open courtyards, the gray London sky provides a softer, more diffuse light that makes colors appear muted, but somehow more sophisticated. When the occasional shaft of direct sunlight breaks through the clouds, it transforms whatever it touches, making the cobblestones gleam and bringing out the rich colors of the vintage clothing and artwork. You pause at a stall selling handmade chocolates, the vendor offering samples on small wooden spoons. The chocolate melts on your tongue, releasing flavors that range from the bitter complexity of single-origin cocoa to the sweet comfort of milk chocolate infused with sea salt. The vendor explains her process with the passion of a true artisan, describing how she sources her cocoa beans and the careful temperature control required to achieve the perfect texture. The crowd in the stables represents every demographic London has to offer. Teenagers with elaborate makeup and carefully constructed alternative fashion statements browse alongside middle-aged couples in weekend casual wear. Tourists with cameras and guidebooks share the narrow walkways with locals who clearly know exactly where they're going. A group of art students sketches the architecture and the people, their pencils moving quickly to capture the constant motion and energy of the space. The scents in the market create their own geography. Near the vintage clothing stalls, the air carries hints of mothballs and old fabric, mixed with the newer smells of leather conditioner and fabric refresher. Around the food vendors, the aromas become more complex. Curry spices from an Indian stall, mixing with the yeasty smell of fresh bread and the sharp tang of pickled vegetables from an Eastern European vendor. You follow a discreet sign pointing toward North Yard, leaving behind the organized chaos of the stables market for something altogether more refined. The transition is gradual but unmistakable. The cobblestones become more regular, the architecture more deliberately preserved, and the atmosphere shifts from commercial energy to something approaching urban sophistication. You pass through an archway that feels like a portal between two different versions of Camden, emerging into a courtyard that seems to exist in its own pocket of calm within the larger market ecosystem. North Yard reveals itself as a carefully curated collection of restaurants and bars housed in converted railway arches and Victorian warehouse buildings. The cobblestones here have been restored rather than simply preserved, their surface smooth enough for comfortable walking, but retaining enough irregularity to remind you of their industrial heritage. The sound of your footsteps becomes more muted, absorbed by the careful acoustic design that allows conversation to flow without the overwhelming noise levels of the main market areas. The late afternoon light filters through the glass roof that covers part of the courtyard, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that shifts slowly as the sun moves across the London sky. The architecture here speaks to careful restoration rather than simple conversion. Original brick walls have been cleaned and repointed, cast iron structural elements have been painted and preserved, and modern additions have been designed to complement rather than compete with the Victorian engineering. You're drawn to a restaurant called Shrimpy's, its facade a study in understated elegance that manages to feel both contemporary and respectful of its industrial heritage. Through the large windows, you can see diners seated at marble-top tables, their conversations creating a gentle buzz that speaks to the kind of establishment where people come to savor both food and company. The hostess, a woman in her 30s with short dark hair and a genuine smile, greets you with the warmth of someone who genuinely enjoys connecting people with memorable experiences. The interior of Shrimpy's reveals itself as a masterclass in adaptive reuse. The original brick arches have been preserved and highlighted, their warm red color providing a backdrop for contemporary furniture and lighting. The open kitchen allows you to watch the chefs at work, their movements choreographed with the precision of professionals who have worked together long enough to anticipate each other's needs. The sound of knives on cutting boards provides a rhythmic backdrop to the conversation, while the occasional sizzle from the grill adds punctuation to the culinary symphony. You're seated at a table near one of the large windows that look out onto the courtyard, where other diners are taking advantage of the outdoor seating despite the cool weather. They're wrapped in blankets provided by the restaurant, their breath visible in small puffs as they laugh and talk over glasses of wine. The contrast between the warmth inside and the crisp air outside creates an intimate atmosphere that feels both cozy and connected to the larger world. The menu at Shrimpy's reflects the kind of thoughtful approach to ingredients and preparation that has made North Yard a destination for serious food lovers. Your server, a young man with an encyclopedic knowledge of both the menu and the wine list, explains each dish with the enthusiasm of someone who has tasted everything and genuinely believes in what the kitchen is producing. His recommendations are precise and personal, taking into account not just the technical aspects of each dish, but how they might appeal to your particular tastes and mood. You order the pan-fried cod with samphire and brown butter, a dish that arrives looking deceptively simple, but revealing layers of complexity with each bite. The fish has been cooked with precision, its flesh flaking easily while retaining moisture and sweetness. The samphire provides a briny contrast that speaks to the sea, while the brown butter adds richness without overwhelming the delicate flavor of the cod. Each element has been prepared with care and combined with the kind of restraint that allows individual flavors to shine. The wine you've chosen, a crisp white from a small English vineyard, provides the perfect complement to the fish. The server had described it as having mineral notes with hints of green apple and a clean finish, and you discover that his description was both accurate and inadequate. The wine seems to enhance rather than compete with the food, each sip preparing your palate for the next bite while providing its own subtle pleasures. From your table, you can observe the careful choreography of service that makes a good restaurant function smoothly. Servers move between tables with purposeful efficiency, their timing coordinated to ensure that no diner feels rushed or neglected. The sommelier makes his rounds, offering tastings and explanations with the kind of knowledge that comes from genuine passion rather than mere professional obligation. Even the busboys work with precision, clearing and resetting tables with movements that never interrupt the flow of conversation. The other diners in Shrimpies represent a cross-section of London's food-conscious demographic. A couple in their 60s share a bottle of champagne and discuss the merits of different preparations of oysters, their conversation revealing decades of shared meals and refined palates. At a nearby table, two women in their 30s examine their dishes with the focused attention of food bloggers, taking photos and making notes while maintaining an animated discussion about flavor profiles and presentation techniques. The lighting in the restaurant changes subtly as the afternoon progresses toward evening. The natural light from the windows becomes softer and more golden, while the interior lighting is gradually adjusted to maintain the intimate atmosphere without becoming too dim for comfortable dining. The effect is so subtle that you only notice it in retrospect, when you realize that the entire mood of the space has shifted without any dramatic changes. You decide to extend your meal with a dessert, choosing the chocolate tart with salted caramel ice cream. When it arrives, the presentation is elegant but not overwrought. A perfect slice of tart with a Canal of ice cream that's already beginning to soften at the edges. The first bite reveals the complexity that good pastry work can achieve. The bitter edge of dark chocolate balanced by the sweet richness of the caramel, with the salt providing a counterpoint that makes both flavors more intense. The coffee that follows is served in a proper porcelain cup with a small plate of petit fours that the kitchen has prepared as a gift. The coffee itself is excellent, rich and complex without being bitter, with a crema that speaks to beans roasted with care and extracted with precision. The petit fours are tiny masterpieces of technique, each one a different flavor combination presented in a single perfect bite. As you finish your meal, you become aware of how the restaurant has created its own microclimate within the larger Camden ecosystem. The noise and energy of the markets feel distant here, replaced by the more refined sounds of cutlery on porcelain, wine being poured, and conversation conducted at a level that allows for genuine communication. It's a reminder that Camden's transformation from industrial area to cultural destination has created space for many different kinds of experiences, from the raw energy of the street markets to the sophisticated pleasures of serious dining. You step back out into the courtyard of North Yard, the cool evening air a sharp contrast to the warmth of the restaurant. The late afternoon has given way to early evening, and with it has come a subtle but unmistakable change in the atmosphere of Camden. The light has taken on the golden quality that photographers call the magic hour, when the low angle of the sun transforms even the most mundane urban landscapes into something approaching art. You make your way back toward the canal, following the cobbled paths that connect the various sections of the market. The crowds have thinned somewhat as the day progresses, and there's a more relaxed quality to the movement of people through the spaces. Vendors are beginning the slow process of packing up their stalls, folding clothes, and wrapping fragile items with the practiced efficiency of those who perform this ritual daily. The sound of metal poles being collapsed and boxes being stacked creates a gentle percussion that speaks to the end of another trading day. The canal, when you reach it again, has been transformed by the changing light. The water, which appeared gray and utilitarian during your earlier visit, now reflects the warm colors of the sky, creating a ribbon of gold and orange that cuts through the heart of Camden. A narrowboat is making its way slowly upstream, its engine putting out a steady rhythm that harmonizes with the gentle lapping of water against the canal banks. You choose to walk west along the towpath, following the canal as it curves away from the market areas toward the more residential sections of Camden. The path here is quieter, shared mainly with dog walkers and the occasional cyclists making their way home from work. The industrial architecture of the market gives way to converted warehouses and modern apartment buildings, their large windows beginning to glow with warm interior light as residents return home and begin their evening routines. A couple walks ahead of you, their arms linked and their pace leisurely. They stop frequently to point out details, a particularly striking piece of graffiti on a warehouse wall, a pair of swans that have taken up residence near a moored narrowboat, the way the light reflects off the windows of the buildings on the far bank. Their conversation is too quiet to overhear, but their body language speaks to the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from years of shared walks and discoveries. The towpath takes you under a series of bridges, each one creating its own acoustic environment. Under the road bridges, the sound of traffic becomes more prominent, with the rumble of buses and the occasional motorcycle adding urban percussion to the gentler sounds of the canal. Under the railway bridges, the architecture creates a different kind of space entirely, darker and more enclosed, with the occasional rumble of a train overhead adding drama to the passage. You pause at one of the wider sections of the path, where a small cafe has set up outdoor seating on what was once a loading dock for canal barges. The tables are occupied by a mix of locals and visitors, all taking advantage of the mild evening to sit beside the water with drinks and light meals. The conversation here has a different quality than in the restaurants of North Yard, more casual and communal, with strangers occasionally joining in each other's discussions about the boats passing by, or the merits of different walking routes along the canal. A narrowboat approaches the cafe, its occupants clearly preparing to moor for the evening. The boat is painted in traditional colors, deep green with red and gold trim, and smoke rises from its chimney, suggesting that someone is preparing dinner in the compact galley below. The boat's owner, a man in his 50s with weathered hands and a practical wool sweater, handles the mooring ropes with the casual competence of long experience. His movements are economical and precise, each action serving a specific purpose in the complex process of bringing a 60-foot boat safely to rest against the canal bank. The light continues to change as you walk, the golden hour giving way to the softer illumination of early evening. Street lamps begin to flicker on along the towpath, their warm light creating pools of illumination that will guide walkers safely through the gathering dusk. The windows of the buildings along the canal begin to glow more brightly as interior lights are switched on, creating a constellation of domestic scenes that you can glimpse as you pass. In one window, a woman waters plants on a windowsill, her silhouette backlit by the warm light of her apartment. In another, a man sits reading in an armchair, a cat curled on his lap and a lamp casting a circle of light around his book. These glimpses into other lives create a sense of connection and community, reminding you that the canal serves not just as a tourist attraction, but as a genuine neighborhood where people live and work and pursue their daily routines. The sound environment along the canal has changed with the approaching evening. The daytime sounds of construction and traffic have given way to something more domestic and peaceful. You can hear the distant sound of a television from one of the narrowboats, mixed with the closer sound of someone practicing piano in one of the converted warehouses. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, answered by another dog from the opposite direction, creating a brief canine conversation across the water. You reach a section where the canal widens slightly, creating a basin where several narrowboats are moored in what appears to be a more permanent arrangement. These boats have the look of homes rather than holiday rentals. Solar panels on the roofs, small gardens in pots and planters, curtains in the windows that speak to long-term residents rather than temporary occupation. Smoke rises from several chimneys, and you catch the scent of wood fires mixed with cooking smells that suggest people are settling in for the evening. A woman emerges from one of the boats carrying a watering can, which she uses to tend to the impressive array of plants that she has somehow managed to cultivate in the limited space available on her boat's roof. She works with the focused attention of someone who understands that every plant must earn its place in such a constrained environment. When she notices you watching, she offers a friendly wave before disappearing back into her floating home. The path ahead curves gently to the right, following the canal as it makes its way toward King's Cross and the wider network of London's waterways. But for now, you're content to find a bench positioned to take advantage of the view back toward Camden Lock, where the lights of the market are beginning to create reflections on the dark water. The sounds of the evening, distant music, quiet conversation, the gentle movement of water, combine to create a sense of peace that feels both urban and pastoral, a reminder that even in the heart of one of the world's great cities, there are places where time seems to move at a